when you're asked to care for God's people, that can go a long way. So for you to have love for the people that you serve can weather a number of storms, and can go a long way in establishing what an authentic community of faith is. So I've really kind of claimed and reclaimed the concept of community as an essential part of what the church is. So even though there might be more of a club mentality to some churches, to the extent that you can be somewhat authentic in your path of following Jesus together, that's been probably the most sustaining part for me.
Hello and welcome to episode 32 of the Bishop on a Bike podcast. I am Jim Hazelwood, your host. In this episode, we sit down with Pastor Tim Keyl, who serves as the pastor at Bethesda Lutheran Church in New Haven, Connecticut, right across the street from the Yale Divinity School campus. Tim is a pastor in the New England Synod, and he wears a lot of different hats. Primarily, he's a parish pastor. But I think you'll enjoy this conversation with somebody who has had an interesting and quite varied ministry career, and is evidence of, well, if you just put yourself forward at various points in time, different things happen. So, without further ado and announcements and so forth this time around, let's just get right to our conversation with Tim Keyl.
So I grew up in Groton, Connecticut.
Did you really? I didn't know that.
And Central New Jersey, exurban New York, in a very, it's very near where Trump has his golf course in Bedminster. So horse country, estates. My father was a pastor there for over 20 years, and if you cut me, I will bleed Lutheran for you. So I'm the 6th generation Lutheran pastor, father to son.
I did not know that.
First to leave the Missouri Synod. My ancestors are looking over us from my wall. So on the top left, Ernst Gerhard Wilhelm Keyl came on the Mayflower for the Missouri Synod from Saxony on boats up the Mississippi through New Orleans, and they stopped in St. Louis area, and he was an adherent of the very charismatic guy called Martin Stephan, who was kicked out of the church as a womanizer, and then Karl Ferdinand C.F. Wilhelm Walther became the stated leader, and Walther's daughter married my great-great-grandfather.
Oh my.
We had a smoking pipe, a Walther's smoking pipe in our family. So in the church wars of the 1970s, when Seminex happened, it was a very challenging time for those of us that were in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and I was a teenager. So I had to figure out if I was, number one, going to stay in the family business or not. Maybe my sister would be the first female ordained in the Missouri Synod. That was one of our jokes. My brother ended up being an organist, and I went to Valparaiso University, where there was some freedom in debating the issues that were at hand in the Missouri Synod, because it's actually an independent university by its identity, although it was heavily influenced by the Missouri Synod. So people were arguing at that time, or debating about women's ordination, and the issue of historicity in the Bible was something that I got to grapple with as a music and theology major, and I figured I could not go to a Missouri Synod seminary, and if we were asked if we believe in a historic 6-day creation, I would not be able to say, of course, even though some of my classmates were prepared to to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then many of the storied teachers from the Missouri Synod walked out with the students. And so that was another kind of heady time. So I ended up going to Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago when the Seminex faculty joined with the LCA faculty there, and got to sit at their feet and be in Hyde Park and navigate all that. And I shouldn't tell you this, but by the time, I met with the bishop of the New Jersey Synod of the LCA, but I was still attending my dad's church, which is the Missouri Synod Church. So the way to become part of the candidacy process then was to join an LCA church, but there wasn't one close by. So I ended up joining my internship congregation in Philadelphia, and then I affiliated with the Metro Philadelphia, the Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod, and I was entranced, endorsed, and approved in one meeting.
Well, that's okay, because we went to seminary at the same time, because I went to PLTS at the same time that the 4 Seminex professors of Keyl, Bob Smith, Carl Gresser, George Hoyer came to PLTS when you had the folks go to Chicago. And I was a member of an LCA congregation. And when I went to apply for candidacy, I learned that the LCA process was it was just, never-ending papers and meetings and da-da-da. And then I found out what the ALC process, which was fill out this 3x5 card, and then when you get there, the faculty will decide. And so I switched memberships from congregations to go to the ALC, so I didn't have to go through all that process. I don't think that maybe neither of us would make it through the candidacy process today. We would have no patience for the bureaucracy. Cool. And so your first call was, you met Kari there at Sao Paulo?
My last year of seminary, I met Kari, who also graduated from Valparaiso 3 years after I did, and we had never met the 1 year that we were there, but she had heard about me. And so when she was asking about what seminary to go to, she, also a product of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, did not know as well where to go. And people said, well, Tim Keyl's at LSTC. You could go there. So when we were introduced as alums of Valparaiso, we immediately hit it off. And since I was a senior, I took a call in the Illinois Synod of the LCA in a suburb of Elmhurst while she finished her degree. And
so you were early. The reason they said, well, Tim Keyl's going there is because you were this Missouri Synod person, born, bred, bled, everything. Yes. And you were making the shift. You were one of the early ones to do that.
I had made the change. Okay. And for Kari, her parents were also very parochial. They were Lutheran Missouri Synod school teachers.
Sure.
She started as a psychology major, and her father said, you should be a pastor. And she's like, what? My father, who's in the Missouri Synod, said I should think about being a pastor? Huh. Wow. And she was ordained in the ELCA, because I was ordained in 86. ELCA started in 88, 87. She was ordained in 1990 in the Metro Chicago Synod.
Wow.
And then when she was ordained, before she was ordained, I asked if I could go back to graduate school, because I loved school so much. So I got a sacred music degree from Catholic University in Washington, D.C. Kari got a call in the Metro D.C. Synod in Virginia. I went on leave from call, so my synod was still the Metro Chicago Synod while I was doing graduate work.
And you've done a degree, but that's been a love and a passion for a long time for you, music and liturgy.
I was a trained singer. I started Valpo the year that the Lutheran Book of Worship came out, so the renewal of liturgy and worship was at this wonderful institute which had reputable church music. So I learned everything, and I felt, when I've given presentations, I said, and I discovered something in the liturgy that I hadn't discovered before when the LBW came out. Joy!
So then, you've served congregations in Illinois, Virginia, Vermont,
New Hampshire,
and now here is. And before we talk about Bethesda and what's kind of happening here and the changes it's going through, of all those other congregations, what's your takeaway from all of those years in different places? I mean, different things in different places, but what makes a parish pastor a good parish pastor is maybe another way I'm asking the question.
Well, it may sound trite, but I think when you're asked to care for God's people, that can go a long way. So for you to have love for the people that you serve can weather a number of storms, and can go a long way in establishing what an authentic community of faith is. So I've really kind of claimed and reclaimed the concept of community as an essential part of what the church is. So even though there might be more of a club mentality to some churches, to the extent that you can be somewhat authentic in your path of following Jesus together, that's been probably the most sustaining part for me. And I have said that if I'm not excited about being there on a Sunday with the congregation, then I shouldn't be there. So Sundays aren't always perfect, but there's something about people coming from wherever they are at least one day a week to be this community, whether you want to call it, like Daniel Erlander, a contrast community or a manna community or a gospel-oriented community or a justice-oriented community. So different congregations have different emphases, but they're building their sense of who they are in Jesus, and you get to be like the cheerleader for that.
Nice. Nicely put. And so Bethesda, this is a congregation, because it's next to Yale, has a long history of kind of being the Yale Lutheran Church, but it's changed quite a bit from that time when Roland Bainton and others were members of this congregation and living in the shadow of that heritage, and now trying to figure out what it's going to be next or going forward.
I was privileged to have former Bishop Hal Wimmer as my parishioner, and he was here in the 1960s and 70s when it was thick with Lutheran faculty and with Swedish immigrants. And some people told me there was more of a divide there than you might think, that you had the Swedes that looked at the Yale people in one way and the Yale people that looked at the Swedish immigrants in another way. And I think since Hal was here and up to now, there's been much more of an integration of that divide. I don't know how serious it was, but Bethesda has had a long history of just welcoming people that are affiliated with Yale into their community, but the Yale Divinity School faculty have all retired or died. So we have some faculty, we have some librarians that work at Yale, we have someone that works for the union at Yale, for the people that work in food service and cleaning. So it's a real hodgepodge of people, not even so many generations of Swedes, so people that just come to the New Haven area for a variety of reasons. And I think Bethesda has come out in a good spot, that it's not a contentious place. It's, I think, worked hard at being hospitable to anybody. So it's been a Reconciling in Christ congregation since the 1990s. We tend to really benefit from, in my time, young adults and researchers that may not be here for a long period of time, but when I think of all the other places that I've served, we give our eye teeth, for young adults, for people that change the demographic of the median age of our congregation. So I really don't have a lot of elderly people. Have quite a few that are maybe 50s and 60s, and then this big clump not big clump. For our size congregation, we have probably 20 young adults that flavor our congregation.
Nice. And apartments for some students?
So Bethesda has like 22,000 square feet of building and a lot of green space in our grounds because it was a mansion that was inhabited by a department store magnate. The Parish house was built in 1910, and when the Swedes came, they loved being upwardly mobile. That's what Hal Wimmer has said. They purchased the property in the 1950s and built buildings. So in that mansion, there are apartments that house Divinity school students in an intentional community called Bethesda House that was established 6 years ago. So it's one of the things that I got to influence here.
And you're also you've got refugee ministry for kids here. There's clearly a preschool, because I walked through and they had it all roped off, and I couldn't figure out if they were trying to keep me out or the kids in, and I asked and they said both. But anyway, they let me walk through the parking lot. So I mean, the space is used a lot, is my point.
Yes. We've kind of figured out that the building, we need to frame the building as an asset for the community, for the city of New Haven. We recognize that because we're so close to the Yale Divinity School, we can house Yale Divinity School students that leaven our ministry by volunteering for a homeless shelter program, meal program. The Easter Vigil, they were acolytes. We've added to our building use since I've been here so that we can be recognized by those that use it as a friendly space for people to have an after-school program for refugee children, to provide a space for recording music, to housing 12 men from a ministry called Abraham's Tent for a week in the winter. And that makes us feel like we're contributing something to the world around us on behalf of Christ, because we're neighborly, and it also contributes to our ability to sustain our large physical plant.
Yep, tying those. And you got some of that from the work with, what was it?
Partners for Sacred Places. So the question that people really like to consider is, what would New Haven miss if Bethesda were not here? If people are coming to a concert, how do they contribute to the economy of New Haven? Well, they might eat at a restaurant, or they might park somewhere and put money in the meter. They might shop. And
so you're helping to make the case to the town or the city of your economic value.
Yes, and our social value, so that if we were not able to minister to those that were in need, then who would do that? So we play a part. And the very reputable agency that cares for the homeless population is one of our partners and loves that the churches are interested in helping them with their winter shelter program. And it's so successful that they've had to reduce the numbers of worship spaces that do this, because it's very stressful for the guys that have their 8 weeks. And then we partner with each other and we get to know each other, because we share our week with the United Church of Christ Church in Hamden, and we switch off, using our buildings each year, but our members volunteer with one another.
Oh, huh. Wow, interesting. That's a lot that's happened in 7 years. When you add it all up, everything we've talked about, and I know we've not gotten into other things, but wow.
Yes, it's a active congregation. It's not growing leaps and bounds, but we're able to sustain what we have because of the mix of people that use the building, our student community, our kind of regular flow of researchers and young adults, and we have retirees that join the congregation. So we're able to kind of applaud our ministry by the kind of mixed numbers of people that are here.
So the other hat you wear is Chair of Global Mission. And I just love the story. I'll ask it for you to tell it for us, of how you got involved with that, in particular in New Hampshire when you were serving there, and our partnership with the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Jordan and the Holy Land.
So in Nashua, New Hampshire, there was a former missionary who served in Liberia, whose husband died of a very aggressive cancer, and they had just bought a condo in Nashua. So she went stateside and was active at Christ the King and active in teaching that congregation and its pastor about the global church. And when it came time to host a pastor from Jerusalem for his first sabbatical, based on our congregation's reputation as interested in the global church, and that there was a cottage that was being offered in New Hampshire, we were asked to host this pastor. Well, Jerusalem is a pretty, urban place. So to have this family stay at this quiet lakeside cottage probably wasn't the best idea. So as soon as the crickets and the frogs started making noise, they were afraid. So we would connect with them and invite them for meals. We would take them on tours. We took them on a tour of the Stonyfield Farm yogurt factory. They would beg us to just be with them as much as possible. Okay. So we ended up finding a place in a mother-in-law apartment for someone rather than the cottage. And our kids were near the same age, and I remarked to Nahala, the pastor's wife, isn't it amazing that our kids are getting along so well? And she said, well, they're all pastors' kids after all. So we just kind of fell in love with each other, and by the next year, Kari and I took part of our sabbatical to study there, and the ecumenical institute that we were studying at was directly across the street from where this pastor and his family lived. So we just kept the love going, and now it's been about 13 years, and that pastor is now the bishop.
And we got to be there for his installation
Yeah.
last winter. And so the New England Synod is a companion church with the ELCJHL, and you've been there a lot. How many times have you? Like 10 times?
It's probably 13 times.
So almost,
because I've gone on my own with my family. I've gone twice on sabbatical on my own, and because children grow up and then get married, the bishop's daughter got married last summer, and they insisted that Kari and I come.
That's great. And you, to go back to something you said about being at Christ the King in Nashua, the woman taught the pastor, that was obviously you, about the global church. And then obviously this thing came together. But what's the benefit for a congregation to know about or be engaged with the global church?
I think one of the best ways that you can think about who God is to get outside of yourself. I don't know if that sounds right, but for those of us that bleed Lutheran like I bleed, you talk about caring for your community. It's very important. But to understand that the church is bigger than your congregation, and you keep going in concentric circles, then you learn that there are Lutherans throughout the globe that are doing very interesting things in their contexts. So to learn about the hospital that is in Liberia, Phoebe Hospital, which I learned about when I was in Nashua, and then to have somebody from your congregation go to that hospital and report all the wonderful things that Lutheran church is doing on behalf of everybody, and to learn that even the civil strife in Liberia was heavily influenced by the Lutheran church, particularly by women who said that their sons and husbands have to stop sacrificing themselves. That just really opens up your mind. So then to have this kind of arranged relationship with the ELCJ-HL, because it was established after the ELCA that synods get partner churches, then you have to get to know your fellow Lutherans there. And one time I was talking to pastors, and I was saying they were celebrating the Reformation the same way we were celebrating the Reformation, but they have congregations that speak Arabic. So you might hear A Mighty Fortress sung in Arabic. That's really wild.
Yeah, and I think that that's excellent. The only other thing that I would add is, because our partners in Honduras and in the Holy Land, they're both struggling churches in very difficult contexts. And whenever I go to either place, I just have a new appreciation for the faithfulness on the part of God's people in situations that many of us here would just throw up our hands.
Yeah, you're reminded of like the first church where the martyrs were in a minority context where the governing people were not very happy that there were Christians that were valuing more equality among their people. And there's some very true similarities to that in both Honduras and in Jerusalem and Jordan and the West Bank.
And so because the church is experiencing what it's experiencing in Palestine, what's your sense of because we talk a lot here about the future of the church and where it's going and what is happening. How do they look at that question? Because for us, we're sitting in a building that's 50 years old. Well, the congregation's been here 60, 70 years. And then we think, an old church in New England is 100 years or 125 years. They're in... that's just nothing compared, they're 2,000 years ago, Jesus is walking around their, sidewalk. How do they think about the context of the church that's different than how we think about the church and its future?
They, I think, are very connected to Middle Eastern culture. They're very connected to what it means to be Semitic, how Arab Semites are kin to Jesus and that part of the world that has sustained Christianity since Pentecost. So they would call Jesus like our brother, and it would mean something very different than what we might say when we call Jesus our brother. So when we talk about tradition, it means something even more kind of substantial over there, that they represent the body of believers in the actual place where God has kissed the earth. And they share that place with two other major monotheistic religions, Judaism, where the Western Wall is, and Islam, which has Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, the site from which Muhammad is said to have ascended. So they have this kind of visceral sense of being Christian while they're a minority religion now, and for them to be effective is to leaven the world around them by what they do. And their main gifts in ministry are schools and social service ministries.
So the big question that I always get asked whenever I did those dinners, and there's always one person that always asks, what's the solution to the Middle East crisis? The two-state, what's the one-state solution? And I always find myself in a situation of having to explain what that is, because most people don't even know what that is, and so forth and so on. And you're going back in next month for
25 people?
14th trip, 25 people. What's the hope that leading these trips gives to you in terms of both the religious and the political context, and especially as United States Americans going over there? Why do you lead these trips, I guess is another way of asking the same question.
I think to get the experience of life there in your bodies, that your body maintains the sense of what the hills and the olive trees and the eyes of the people that you look at that become humanized to you. They're not stereotypes. They're not whatever you imagine them to be from what you hear in the news, but you make true connections with them because of our Lutheran identity. So if we're matched to this group of people, we first encounter them as people that are walking with Jesus. And we are encountering the living stones as the primary mission for our trips. And once you start there, then you add all the other layers of what the occupation means, how challenging it is to live your life when freedom of movement is restricted, how education is a real benefit for the children that hopefully will influence the political challenges that are there. And you realize that you bring them hope because you care about them.
So the last question that I have is thinking about our conversation. Anybody listening here would think, look, this guy, 1, 2, 3, 4, sixth in a long line of pastors, Missouri Synod, going back to the Mayflower.
1839.
1839. The whole Seminex Missouri Synod, and as a college student engaging in those conversations about the Bible and the church and the ordination of women at that time, which was a hot topic. And then global mission, the global church, and also then you get to work at a place like Bethesda, Yale. I think a lot of pastors would listen to this and going, oh, if I could only have part of that as my ministry life, made me very, very jealous. You obviously didn't set out to plan it that way along. But as you look back and just as I kind of put that all together, what's your reaction to that?
What a life, huh?
Yeah.
There is the adage about, I don't know what it is, 98% of life is showing up. So I've been very fortunate to have a variety of experiences, whether it's kind of suburban Chicago, suburban Washington, D.C., I asked Corey when we were leaving Vermont, what about our country living? She goes, we've had our country living. We had a dairy farmer in our congregation. So there's a breadth of, I skied a lot. So there, your life as you stay in it and as you pursue God's grace through it and are open to the gifts that you are either given or enabled to be alongside of, just make for a very full experience, I guess. It's just, we had a student over for dinner last night. We're having our closing Eucharist for the semester in the small chapel on the hill. I'm preparing a funeral and a wedding for Saturday. We had a wonderful Holy Week. We're taking 25 to the trip in May. There's just a lot to be engaged with, and I'm glad that I have that part in it.